in this video series, it's split into two parts. There is part 1 and part 2. I think we just done that so that we can manage the content that is there. Basically, we're going to be looking at how to do a valuation of a business. Now, let me emphasize, in teaching valuation, I'm going to build upon knowledge of previous topics that you've already done. Number 1, I'm assuming you've got a working knowledge of how to calculate weighted average cost of capital. Some of the principles that we go through here will borrow from weighted average cost of capital, and I'm not going to spend time demonstrating those principles again. Specifically, again, related to I just needed to highlight this one, the dividend growth model. Please, if you've forgotten the dividend growth model from calculating cost of equity, please revisit it so that your base for this later is fine. I'm also going to build on your capital budgeting techniques, primarily the discounted cash flow technique. This you did when you're doing project evaluation and investment appraisal. So this is the knowledge that I'm going to build on, and I'm hoping that you're already familiar with it. So there are 3 types of valuation that we can do for a business. The first one is what we call a relative or a market valuation. So here you are valuing the asset, which is in this case the business, based on the prices that others are willing to pay for similar assets. This is a very common technique. If you want to be able to value your house, one of the things that you can do is to look at the price in which your neighbor sold his. That can give you a guide or the range in which you can price your own house. So this is relative market valuation, and we're going to look at those models. The second one is what we call intrinsic, some call it absolute. The term that I prefer is an income-based valuation. This is where every asset should have an ability to generate future cash flows. So we can value those assets by looking at the future cash flows that flow to the entity. The last but not least is we're going to look at the cost or liquid-based valuation techniques, which is the cost that you are sitting on in your balance sheet for the assets, and we call this liquidation value because it looks at the value of the assets individually, and normally this happens in a liquidation or sale. However, the underlying assumptions that we're going to make in this case is the businesses are ongoing. I've got a going concern. So, under intrinsic valuation or under the income-based valuation, we're going to look at 2 models: the dividend discount model as well as the discounted cash flow model. Then under market-based or relative market valuation, we're going to look at approaches, number 1, price earnings, market to book ratio, price to sales ratio, as well as your price to market, price to cash flow rather. Then we're also going to look at your asset-based or liquidation values. The last method, which I have not put in, I think I haven't mentioned this one before, is your market capitalization. Now, this is the one that I just want to start by dealing with on this slide because it's one of the easiest methods. With market capitalization, you're valuing a business based on the market, the share price at the particular date in which you're doing the valuation. So, for example, I could take Econet and say, what is the share price in this date, and I multiply by the number of shares in issue. Then need the market cap. So, just for homework, just go into any Herald, any midweek Herald issue, and look at the ZSE price listing. They'll have market capitalizations for all the companies, and you can actually get the market capitalization for the ZSE as a whole. So that's a starting point sometimes when you want to value a listed entity, and obviously will not apply for a non-listed entity. So that's one easy method in which you can get an estimate of what is the value of the business. But obviously this only applies to entities that are when you're buying a small parcel of shares. Because those are the ones that you can only buy through the ZSE. Now, just to say what model is the best, you need to consider number 1, is the model consistent with the characteristic of the company? There are companies like, for example, your high technology companies like your Facebook, your Microsoft, they don't have a reputation for paying dividend. So in this case, you probably find your dividend growth model might not be the most appropriate entity because the company itself does not have a model for paying dividend. Number 2, you also look at the availability of data. For your discounted cash flow techniques, you need a lot of internal information because you want to project cash flows for the business for the period that is coming. Unless you control, it may be very difficult to demand that information from management because it's highly confidential. Just look at it from this way. If I've got 10% in Econet and I want to do a valuation using the discounted cash flow, can I demand the budgets from Econet? They probably won't give them to me. But if I'm a major shareholder, I'll probably get that information and it becomes easy. Another important consideration is obviously the purpose of the valuation. I always start by saying when you look at purpose of valuation, you're saying, do I want to buy or do I want to sell? If I'm looking at buying, I'm probably going to consider which valuation would give me the minimum valuation. If I'm going to sell, I'm looking at the maximum valuation. But other purposes of valuations could be you want to do a major acquisition, so we want to merge two entities. Sometimes you're doing it for financial reporting purposes. For example, there's been a trigger for impairment and you want to value for the sake of calculating impairment. Sometimes it's for tax purposes where you want to calculate how much. Sometimes it's VAT, for example, when you are doing certain transactions, there could be certain tax triggers that could be there. And obviously the last one, who is the valuation meant for? Is it a minority? Is it a majority shareholder? Is it a 50-50 shareholding? I think those are some of the important things that will affect the choice of the model that you use. Now, so let's start by looking at the dividend growth model. This one uses the dividend cash flow valuation input, and we'll use the dividend growth model, which we learned when we did weighted average cost of capital. Still the same model. So under the dividend cash flow valuation input, you're saying a share will be able to generate cash flows, and normally shares generate cash flows in the form of dividends. The assumption is when you look at the cash flows, I'm looking at the cash flows that are attached to a share, not to the shareholder, but I'm talking about a share. A share will always be in existence as long as the company is in existence. It might change hands, but it will always be in existence. Now, if our assumption is that a business has got a life to perpetuity, which means the capital gain attached to a share will never come to cash flow because the share will always be in existence in life to perpetuity, which means in the medium to long term, the only cash flow that is significant is the dividend. Because, for example, take an example of Old Mutual, which was there more than 100 years ago, which means for each share that was issued when the company started, that share is still in existence. The capital gain is not been realized for as long as the capital is in existence. So the dividend growth model would make a lot of sense in that instance. When is this model appropriate? Number one, when there is a constant dividend. Companies that don't pay dividend, obviously this method will not be applicable. And there has to be a consistent relationship with profitability. Because at the end of the day, sustainable dividend will always come from profit. So entities that are paying a higher dividend than what is sustainable, at some point we're going to struggle to continue paying that dividend. It's also a very good method when you're valuing minority or non-controlling interest, because in this case, you cannot, sometimes it's very difficult to access the cash flows to use other methods. But at the end of the day, if you're a minority shareholder, what accrues to you is what has been declared by the company. If you're a 15% shareholder, you cannot claim that the cash in the business belongs to you, what majority shareholders could easily do because they can influence that decision. Right, so examples of appropriate companies, you're looking at old and well-established companies that are in fast growing. So these companies, we call them, they're in maturity stage. So they're looking at giving out cash to shareholders. They are not fast growing, so they don't have a lot of projects which demand cash. So the calculation, the formula, let's go back to when we calculated cost of equity. The formula that we used was KE equals to D1 divided by P0 plus G. So this is the same formula that we're going to just rearrange. In this case, we are looking for P0. So it becomes P0 is equals to D1 over KE minus G. This is assuming a constant growth in dividends. Please go back to the models that we used to calculate G when we looked at cost of equity there. If there is no growth in dividends, it just becomes the dividend over KE. A very simple and straightforward method there. So how do you determine some of the inputs? We say cost of equity, you're likely going to use your CAPM approach to define your cost of equity, and your G referred to material that we covered when we did work. Now, just to bring in a bit of a dimension here, one of the things that the examiners want is just to bring in a bit of spicing up the question. One of the requirements to use the dividend growth model is when you've got a constant growth in dividends. So how do you value a company which is experiencing a high growth in dividends, which is followed later by a lower but stable growth rate in dividends? Let's look at this example. Highfly Limited is expected to experience a growth of 30% for the next 3 years, and thereafter will experience a growth of 6% per year. Cost of equity 12%, and the current dividend is 60%. So remember, there's 30% and there's 6%. So we cannot apply the dividend growth model based on 30% because this is not going to be constant going forward. So it's only after year 3, where there is a constant growth in dividends, can we apply the dividend growth model. So we can only apply the dividend growth model from year 3 going forward. So we can calculate the dividends for year 1, year 2, and year 3 based on 30%, and then present value these cash flows and add the value of the company based on the dividend growth model from year 3 going forward. Let me just show you here. So for year 1, our dividend is 60 times 30%, which is 0.78. Year 2, we get 1.1, and year 3, we get 1.31. The present value of future dividends in year 1 to year 3 will be equal to 2.43. Right, so here we are saying for year 1, our dividends is 0.3 multiplied by 1.3. We get 0.78, then for year 2 we get 1.1, and for year 3 we get 1.31. So the present value of future cash flows from year 1 to year 3 becomes 2.43. Now, based on this, after year 3, we can now apply the dividend growth model, which here I'm saying value in year 3 becomes D3 plus 1 plus G over KE minus G. So then I calculate the present value to get 23.17. But remember, this is a value in year 3. Then we present value it back to year 0 to 16.49, and now we can add the two values to get 18.92. Right, let's move on and look at discounted cash flow. Very straightforward. When is it most appropriate? When no dividends or dividends differ significantly from the company's capacity to pay a dividend. So in this case, there are no dividends, or when they are, but obviously you can only use it when you've got positive cash flows. It might not be appropriate for loss-making companies. As long as you expect positive cash flows in future, you can still use it. And cash flows align with profitability, and this is most appropriate when you're valuing and controlling interest. Focus period, you look at 3 to 10 years. So your key inputs, it's your cash flows that the company is generating, your growth rate, as well as your discount rate, which is normally your WACC. So when you look at your DCF valuation model, you split your valuation into 2 periods. There is a fixed period, which is the period in which you can make assumptions around your cash flows. Then there's what we call the terminal period, which is the period into perpetuity. During the fixed period, which is normally between 3 to 10 years, you can do a detailed cash flows on a line-by-line item, because at this point you can still estimate based on the assumptions that you can make. But you'll agree with me that as you go into the future, your ability to estimate what's going to happen in the future becomes limited. So that period, we then call it the terminal period, which is sometimes 11 years to perpetuity. And like we said, difficult to estimate cash flows. And in this case, you calculate your terminal value. So I'm going to look at the 2 periods just to give you a bit of insight into that. For the fixed period, the determination of cash flows is similar to when you did your capital budgeting. So here, the principles around I'm looking for cash flows, the growth in cash flows, using inflation, treatment of taxes, all these principles will become the same for this fixed period. Now, these are just some differences that I want you to take note of. Number 1, because in this case, you're looking at a company, you're not going to get your initial investment as the business is already a going concern. So whilst in capital budgeting, when you did investment appraisal, there was an initial investment to buy, be it a plant or what. In this case, the business is already going concern, so you're not going to get that. However, the expectation is that the business will always be replacing and expanding on its capital projects. So you can calculate the yearly additions into our fixed assets by doing a PPE reconciliation. This will give you the disposals and it will give you the additions, and these are cash flows that you need to include. Another very important difference is you're not going to get an investment in working capital, but you need to analyze the movement in working capital, that is your current assets and current liabilities, and be able to say what is the movement on a year-on-year basis. And that becomes your cash flow. Now, the terminal value is your value to perpetuity. So, first and foremost, you need a representative year. Say, for example, I've given you detailed cash flow for the first 5 years. Year 5 could be your representative year. So make sure that in year 5, your representative year, you only have things that are sustainable going into perpetuity. So costs within the representative year should mirror the market costs, because that's what you're going to use to extrapolate value for the perpetuity period. So use the representative cash flow as a basis and apply a nominal growth, which will normally give you into perpetuity. So just to look at calculating the terminal value. So in this case, I'm looking at what is the firm value in year 5. This is the terminal value. So you're saying your free cash flows to the firm in year 5, 1 plus G, 1 minus G. This will give you a value in year 5. This value will need to be discounted back to year 0. And you then add the terminal value together with the value that you've calculated from year 1 to year 5. Now, as part of the homework, please go and look at, I didn't look at these things, but please go and look at how you treat operating leases. Please look at another method where you can calculate your free cash flows to equity. In this case, I assume that we're calculating these free cash flows to the firm. You look at certainty equivalent cash flows and do the example that's in your slides of Shop to Stop Limited. It's a very important practice question for you to master the valuation of a business. Thank you very much.